Today I'm working on making rabbit sausage. I'm actually making 3 different kinds. I'm making a bratwurst, a pesto rabbit sausage, and a red wine garlic sausage. So I'm just walking you through kind of the steps of one type, but the steps themselves are the same for all the sausages. The only thing that's different is what you're going to be putting in them. So in other words, the spices. So the first thing I did was, I trimmed out my rabbit meat. I am not particular when I trim out rabbits for grinds. I do usually cut off some belly flaps and also cut some of the chunks into things like stew beef. This time, because it's summer, I did some kebabs, did some different things to have some different options. I do have about 6 pounds of the ground that is just going to be going into the freezer to be used as ground meat. Now this has only been ground once, so you can still see that we've got, it's a little bit inconsistent, a little bit stringy, rather coarse. I prefer to leave the rabbit meat a little coarse because it is kind of a softer meat, not like beef or pork. So I just find that the texture is a little bit better. So I usually stick with the medium plate all the way through for all the grinds. So, for sausage, this one is going to be a bratwurst. This is 10 pounds. I've got it all measured out. I've sectioned out everything so that I knew what I had and decided what's going into which sausage. And this is the basic step. So after the first grind, you're going to mix in your sausages, and then everything's going back into the refrigerator until it's really well cooled out. You never want to be working with meat that's even a little bit warm. Even if it feels cold to the touch and you think, oh, that's cold enough to use. If you haven't had that in the refrigerator for at least a couple hours, sometimes I'll even pop it in the freezer, not to freeze it through, but just to let it get good and cold, and that kind of speeds it up, getting cooled down to cold again. But if you don't do that, it's really going to stick in your grinder, in your crank, in your sausage stuffer. It is just not going to move, and it makes life miserable. So always work with cold meat, which means you're kind of coming back and forth and working in batches and stages. So after it's ground through, I like to mix my spices in now before I cool it off for that second grind. It gets a first grind, a second grind, and then it gets stuffed. That way I end up with a good consistent texture. I end up with everything really consistently worked through, so you don't end up like with pieces like here where you've got more fat in some than others. You want everything pretty consistently and evenly mixed. So again, after that first grind, I'll mix my spices in. I'll even mix my water in. Most sausage recipes will have a liquid. If it's not something like beer, or wine, it's water. So, that all gets mixed in, and then that all goes into the fridge. So again, very simple. You want to weigh it out, measure out your spices, and I've done that. Simple process. There's not much going into this bratwurst. And then, we've got like caraway seed, salt, white pepper, allspice. That's what is in this recipe. You can find the recipe on the website, meatrabbitstork.org. Then you're just sprinkling that evenly over the top, or fairly evenly, and don't worry too much because you are mixing it through. And then that's the next step. Very simply, very easily, just keep mixing it. Excuse me, that white pepper is very light. I love the white pepper. I love it in the sausages. But it is a finer pepper, so it does tend to make you cough and sneeze a little bit. Try not to sneeze on your sausage. So that's all there is to it. And then, the 10 pounds actually mixes in pretty quickly. Again, really not hard. You're just looking to get it pretty consistently mixed through. And then, it's going to go back in here. I'm going to put the liquid in with it. That way, by putting the liquid in now, you could wait until you grind it through again, but by putting the liquid in now, it's also going to get good and cold. So I'm not going to be warming up the meat by adding maybe a little bit warmer liquid later. So that's it. This is step 2. Mix this up, goes back in the fridge, and we'll come back and we'll grind it through one more time, and then we'll come back after we cool it again and stuff it.